Good morning, everybody. I think we'll kick off here now. We're nearly, numbers are creeping up there, but it's after 9:30, so we'll kick off now. Everyone's busy. So welcome all this morning to this morning's webinar, our HR Barometer report. This is always a fantastic session here this morning. My own name is Annie Fitzgibbon. I'm Director of Member Services here with Cork Chamber. And we're delighted to have you all here along this morning, as I say, for this informative session with our HR partner, Adare HRM. So I know it's a busy time. I know a lot of us are looking forward to the next few weeks, a busy few weeks ahead, I'm sure, for us all still, but an awful lot to consider in the HR landscape. So I'm looking forward to hearing the insights today from our friends in Adare HRM. So just housekeeping really quickly. I know we're very familiar with these online sessions still, but maybe they're slightly less frequent than they maybe were before. We've a lot of in-person events now, which is fantastic. You know, we've met a lot of you at those in recent weeks and months. We have a lot of new members on this morning as well, so welcome. So just to remind you again that maybe to leave mics off for this session, as we have a lot of people online. We are recording the session. It's just for our files. You won't be sharing that. And to feel free to use the chat box, as Vicky mentioned there, for Q&A. Sarah, Amanda and Michelle in Adare HRM will get to those questions towards the end. I suppose just to thank Sarah, Amanda and Michelle from Adare HRM for joining us this morning and for looking after the session for us. They're a fantastic HR partner. And all their details are on our website with regard to accessing further expertise and services from them across a whole range of areas, which they'll bring you through some of those this morning. So just again to introduce Sarah Fagan, Managing Director, Amanda Finnegan, Head of Retained Services, and Michelle McDonough, Head of HR Consulting, who will bring you through today's session. So I'll hand over there now and thanks so much all. We'll talk to you later. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Annie and Cork Chamber, and welcome to all the members here this morning. We're always really excited to roll out the HR Barometer, in particular at this time of year, as it's really timely from a HR strategic preparation perspective. And essentially, as we take stock throughout the session this morning on the emerging trends, the key data and forecasts that will help you lead out on your HR strategies, it's always really important to take a step back and look at the macro impacts that are influencing sectoral and industry decisions. And I think everyone would agree that the past 12 months have not been without its challenges for many sectors, whether it's because of inflation or the geopolitical risks and increased turbulence in the markets. It's been weighing heavily on the global economy, and the risks to the global economy remain elevated because of that. Luckily in Ireland, the Irish economy has proved resilient, but that persistent inflation and higher interest rates poses challenges to businesses in maintaining that resilience. Now, for 2024, economists are forecasting a slowdown in growth in relation to gross domestic product. And that in itself will act as a disruptor to the maintenance of business resilience heading into the next year. And there are other known disruptors as well. I thought it was interesting that the CSO have come out to say in relation to their labour force survey that the employment figures are at the highest since they first started that survey back in 1998. And that in itself, the skills shortage and the flux in the market when it comes to resources and labour is going to challenge businesses into 2024. That, along with the mass exodus of skills from the country, it was recently reported over 64,000 people have left the country. And with that, comes limitations to the skills and the resources that are available within the country. And as we anticipate the trends in terms of increases to headcount next year, it's really about taking stock of how these disruptors, both known and unknown, are going to impact your organization, your strategic goals, and your HR people agenda. And essentially, we want to ensure that we continue to be innovative in HR. That business resilience and maintenance of it is really about understanding what the disruptors are, contingency planning for them, and planning and preparing for change that will push us to be more agile, that will push us to be more innovative. And there's been lots of talk over the last year in relation to technology and how we can use it as an opportunity. So for HR practitioners, understanding the considerations around some technologies such as AI, ChatGPT, and how that can positively impact your organization is something that will help you address some of the known disruptors and maybe some of those that are unknown throughout the next 12 or 24 months. But supporting agile transformation is a conservatism of fiscal spending. And that's something that's actually coming through quite clearly in this year's or this report from the HR Barometer in terms of some of the key data, insights, and metrics. And that conservatism in relation to fiscal spend will likely continue into the next year, essentially ensuring that there is sustainability within our businesses is a huge strategic objective for all businesses across all industries and sectors. But we need to ensure that agile transformation continues within our businesses. So that's looking at the innovation in HR, your strategic strategies, what you're doing from a people agenda perspective, because the pace of change is not slowing down. So it's great to be here this morning. I will shortly introduce my colleagues that will be joining me to present some of the data, but just to touch on the running order for this morning's session. The first thing, I'll be introducing my colleague Amanda Finnegan. Amanda is head of HR Retained Services, and Amanda's going to bring us through some of the HR priorities and key HR metrics. Essentially, I would imagine that a lot of this information won't come as too much of a surprise to you all. But in terms of understanding what the HR priorities are within the Munster region, it's important to take stock of what the information is telling us in order to help inform our strategic decisions. Some of the HR metrics then that Amanda will examine relate to increases in headcount, and particular as we're concerning this data relating to the Munster region, how does it compare to the rest of Ireland? What can you take away from this morning's session, bring back to your business to help assist and support you as you're planning for 2024? Then we'll hand over to my colleague, Michelle McDonough, who's going to look at the key strategic HR areas in the area of gender pay gap, D&I, performance management, and retirement and pensions. As we've seen, there's a lot in the press in relation to auto-enrollment. So what are organisations doing within the Munster region in terms of plans for next year? And how will that address, in some ways, some of the skill shortages that we're all experiencing across industries and sectors? Following that, I'll come back in just to talk you through some of the working practices in relation to hybrid and remote working, some of the key challenges presented in the Munster region, and hopefully that will give you some insight as to the trends of what organizations are going to be investing in, what strategic areas, and that you too can start looking at that within your own business to see how well it will address some of those disruptors, both known and unknown. Finally, then, I'm going to talk to some of the pay and benefit data that we have and the trends over the last number of years in relation to salary increases, very timely in terms of the conversations that are being planned and had over the next couple of weeks in relation to salary increases, but also your remuneration frameworks. What considerations are you giving to the next 12 to 24 months as we consider the EU directive on pay transparency? Is that influencing your decision now in relation to what you're planning and how you're going to go about it in addressing your value proposition as an employer? We'll end the session then, and as Annie mentioned, if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat function and we'll try and address them at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to my colleague, Amanda Finnegan. Amanda, you're very welcome here this morning.
Good morning, Sarah. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. I'm so grateful to look at the results with you. As you know, the HR Barometer has been running for 7 seasons already, including some mid-seasons. So when the pandemic happened, we realized things were changing so frequently that we needed to actually do mid-term investment. So we started relooking at how things are changing and what our strategic priorities were in 6 months batches. So today we're looking at the priorities for the Munster region, and I'd like to introduce 2 new entrants. Over the last 3 years, we had not seen employee engagement and culture at this table. So the top priority, retention, has been before. So it's very interesting to look at how our priorities have shifted. Our first highest priority within the region is employee engagement. And that is the emotional connection I create with either my role, the workplace, my peers. So just how do I feel? How connected do I feel to my environment? At 48.4%, we understand that employee engagement supports retention. It's all got to do with our employee value proposition, how valued I feel, how connected I feel to my work, as I've said. So those are key parameters that we look at from a strategic HR perspective. Retention in Munster region is 38.7%, comparatively to rest of Ireland at a 54.9%. They have two alternative competing priorities, so not employing. So we've got culture and employee engagement. They've got looking for talent, so recruitment and acquisition, as well as culture being that intro there. And then when we look at culture, we're looking at what is the main theme of our organization. Are we planning to succeed? Are we high performing? Are we a learning organization? Are we an innovative organization? How are we putting leaders? How's our leadership behavior supporting it? Is our structure looking at that? Is what we're measuring, so our performance management elements, is that supporting the culture we want? So when we have our peers in HR say to us, this is going to be a priority, as culture is so important to us, we can understand what's going to be happening behind the strategic priority for them. So retention then at the same level of focus at culture at 38.7%. When we look over the last 2 years point, and you can see why I said there's new entrants, retention, talent recruitment and acquisition, and employee health and well-being have been the main focuses. And you can see that being moving position and priorities. But you can see that retention from the previous slide has actually dropped in its focus by 5%. And so we can now understand where we can, from the data, we can look back and see that we're in a cadence of actually looking after the staff that we have, retaining them, making sure that we're looking across the generational importance, the employee life cycle importance, and what's important to that individual, rather than that broad brush stroke that we've been using. It doesn't mean these priorities don't make the table. It just does. It means that the statistics are showing us that they are falling down in priorities, but they are still being looked at. So if we look at October 2022, retention was at 44%, recruitment and talent acquisition was at 37%, and employee health and well-being, although not mentioned here, you'll hear later in our hybrid working policy, that does still remain very important. But in October 2022, that was 31%. When we look at the trends, given the statistics that we've been unable to uncover, what Sarah spoke about around business resilience is becoming more and more important for us. Sustainable businesses, as we all are in that business, is really important. But what we've noticed is that there is a sense of calm entering. I think over the last 2-3 years, there's been a lot of quick, very fast changes. We've been trying to keep pace with the change, and that doesn't change with agile transformation. But we've seen that there is a more temperate approach to how we approach things, and it's got to be sustainable. So our decision making, whether those disruptors external to our organization or internally, so whether the macroeconomics are impacting us or whether the workforce trends within our organization has changed, as HR practitioners and supporting the business through our people strategy, we're seeing that the way that we're responding to salary increases, bonus payments, workforce policies, those elements is becoming far more calm and in the interest of sustainable business practices. This is a long-term game. It seems as though we're all starting to think long-term again, beyond the 1 or 2 year horizon, far more into the 3, 4, 5. In some businesses, even in the longer term. Sarah mentioned earlier that agile transformation is still important. And what we're going to be looking at agile transformation, if we want to maybe go back to the previous slide, our focus is far more around the resilience and the responsiveness to what we're seeing in that calm environment. So are we ready? Do we have the right skills? Are we looking at things that are coming out there, whether we plan to or not? So ChatGPT and AI came out in January. What were we doing then? Have we been looking at that? How can it improve our business processes? Are we cautious not to automate the things that would be problematic for us? But are we looking at that? And that's actually where innovation becomes so important. As HR practitioners, we should be looking at cultivating an innovative culture within our organization. So is it all right for people to think about things differently? Do we encourage that? Is that part of our culture? Are we looking at agility as a skill that we want to see, problem solving, being able to look at things from a different point of view? Are the solutions we're putting in scalable? Are we thinking about if things need to change, how quickly can people adapt to it? Do we give them this change management skills that they need? Do we collaborate to make that happen? Are we making sure that our businesses are able to be innovative? Does our culture support it? Because that's what's going to make us sustainable in the long run. So to support all of these trends, we've got to have our HR metrics. So how were we in the past? What are we doing going forward? And one of our cornerstone metrics is employee turnover. Now, we can see through the data that we're doing really well in the Munster region. If you slide your eye to the bottom right of the screen, the average turnover expected for 2024 in the rest of Ireland is 12.4%, where that in Munster is only 10.2%. It means that we're doing really good at our retention strategies. We're looking great at on our engagement elements. It means that we're going to be focusing on that. We've seen that culture is a big differentiator for us. And these percentages have been slowly dropping. But what we do proactively around employee turnover in our businesses is important. So whether our number is high or low, are we looking at different unique business unit activities in our businesses? Are we comparing their units retention and turnover against their previous month? When you're in a growth phase, are you looking at it in a pro rata phase? Are you thinking about things like that? Because our turnover can be quite a strong indicator around the things that are either really working very well or not so well in our different unique business units. So a caution there to just look at employee turnover, just not on a blanket scale, but go a little bit deeper in your business units. On the next slide, you'll see actually how our headcount is being planned for. So organizations within the Munster region, almost 8 in 10 at 77% are planning to increase their headcount in 2024. Against the rest of Ireland, 7 out of 10, 67%. The expected increase overall in their headcount in 2024 is going to be 13.4%. And if I mention all those strategic focuses and looking how we're going to be nurturing our organization, it makes sense that the planned increase of HR headcount, more on the strategic element, not more of the same, but maybe niche skills hired is at 16.8%, that is being increased. Planning to increase the organizations, almost 3 in 10 organizations. So we can see from our peers who completed the survey that we are really thinking about how do we sustain our organizations from a people perspective. When we looked at how we, learning and development is always a really strong sustainer of our organizations. We look at some of the data points over here, making sure that our people have time to actually sit down and learn things, take it in, apply it into their working environment. We are providing 4.7 days for learning in the organization. If I'm talking at Munster as an organization level, 7 in 10 organizations are intending to increase their spend. When we asked how much of your payroll spend are you planning to spend on learning and development, it was a 3.9%. And when we asked what were the things that you invested, your top 3 innovative investments that you implemented in the last year, our peers were saying 65% had actually provided e-learning from external organizations. And that gives us a clear indication that we're wise. If we don't have the skills internally, we go and look for it externally and provide it to the team that need it. We also did the same thing, not just from e-learning, but extended courses. 45% of our peer group said that they went and sourced sources outside of the organization. And we actually made use of our learner management systems at 35%. We're increasing the spend, the learning initiatives. 65% of our organizations said that, and that was an increase of 13%. And a good pause at the AI and ChatGPT is that 5% of our organizations are exploring that for learning and development. And I know this is going to become far more of an increased percentage in the years to come. And so my one question to us is, have we started playing with it on a personal level? Have you tested it? Have you seen how it could potentially work for you? Organizations will have had to have policies about what content gets put in there, because that is external to your organization. But you could simply explore it by asking it to write a letter, a formal invitation, for your personal life, just to kind of see how it works. If you haven't explored it, I know there's many of us that might use it on a day-to-day basis. But from a learning and development perspective, I think it's important to realize that it looks like we're going to continue investment here. So as we are responsible and accountable partners in the business, we kind of ask, if we're investing 3.9%, how are we reporting against that? And so we ask the question, how are you measuring the return on investment? And on the next slide, you will see the Munster region, we're saying 3% of us are actually looking at the return on investment calculation. For the rest of Ireland, 12% are looking at how we accounting for the investments being made. When we ask what metrics do you use, this is for the entire island. We try to prioritize what are they looking at. And we looked at the impact of performance metrics. So is the learning making a difference in our environments? And 68% of us are actually making use of that measurement. Are we using it? Is it enhancing engagement? We're trying to find that out. 63 of us are using it like in that way. Knowledge and skills retention. So are people actually remembering the learning? 58 of us are 58% of organizations are actually using that. Transferability of training. So I've been on the course, I'm able to walk into my workspace and actually apply it immediately. 42% of us actually using that as a measurement. Learning management systems activity. So how many clicks are there? Can I move in and make use of the system? How many people actually go in daily? So some of us are actually using that as metrics of return on investment at 26%. At the same rating, user satisfaction rating. So how easy is it to use this? How joyfully can I actually report back on this training event? 26% of us are actually using that as a metric. And 5% is the ascribed metric of other things. So if we're looking at return on investment, this is kind of the metrics people are using. If you're wanting to go to a far more financial, I've invested X, and therefore the return is Y, we've got an ebook available on our website that gives you at least 4 or 5 alternative return on investment calculations that can help you account for that 3.9% of your payroll. We highly recommend it. I think it's such a powerful metric with us within the HR strategic realm to just help us make sure that we show how accountable we are with the money invested in our area. I'd like to introduce Michelle McDonough, the head of HR services, and she'll be taking you through the key strategic areas. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you, Amanda, and great to be with you this morning. Sorry, my video is not working. Oh, there we go. Great to be with you, and really interesting to see that feedback on the particularly return on investment, and hopefully that ebook will be helpful for people in terms of getting some insights. So what I'm going to talk you through today is some of the key strategic HR areas, and always interesting to keep a track on these from each of our Barometer reports. We're going to start off looking at the area of retirement and pensions. And so both areas are very topical at the moment and obviously changing quite a lot. So from a pension perspective, initially, we can see that 77% of the organizations we surveyed contribute towards a pension scheme. So interesting to see it's becoming really a key part of a total reward package. And in terms of what level that contribution is at, you can see variance there ranging from 2% up to 10%, with the majority of respondents sitting around the 5% mark. So 32% of those who do provide a pension are providing it at the level of 5% contribution. And then the lucky few are at 10%, are receiving a benefit of 10% of your salary, or 3% even above that again. So when we think about, how this pension space is evolving, and as was mentioned earlier on around auto-enrollment, there are big changes coming, and particularly for those 23% of organisations that don't currently contribute towards a pension scheme. Because while we don't have an official effective date yet when auto-enrollment will take effect, we know that it is going to come into place from the second half of next year. And that is going to mean that employers are required on a mandatory basis to establish a pension scheme if they don't have one, and secondly, to actually contribute to that, starting at 1.5% of salary, and that's going to increase gradually over a number of years. So in our data, we asked, are organisations prepared for this change? And we see that 1 in 5 organisations are very prepared for auto-enrollment, and 3 in 10 are not prepared for auto-enrollment. So we would encourage organisations, even if you have a scheme in place at the moment, it's important to start to understand what the detail is in the bill as it's currently drafted, and think about how your current scheme is going to run alongside auto-enrollment. For example, if you don't allow people to come in until maybe 6-month service, versus auto-enrollment will be required from day one. So there are some points of conflict there that will need to be resolved. So it is important that organisations are budgeting for this next year, but they're also starting to think about where the challenges might be in relation to pensions. The next area I want to look at is retirement. Again, another very topical area. And we see that 87% of organisations have no plans to change their retirement age. So there is an increasing pressure, I suppose, in terms of even asking the question, should we remove the retirement age? And interesting to see every time we run the survey what the kind of norms are each year. So 77% of organisations have a retirement age of 65. So even though the state pension now has moved to 66, we still see majority of organisations have 65, which obviously creates the question around, well, what happens between even at least initially 65 and 66? And we see that figure is up from 40% in 2022. So for the organisations then that maybe are a little bit more prepared to change, we see that 3% of organisations are planning to remove the age requirement completely. So quite a low number. And I always think it's interesting when you compare to the UK, which don't have any retirement age, and we see in Ireland we're a lot slower to kind of go down that route, and we're taking a more cautious approach in terms of managing changing retirement. And as we know, 65 now is very different from 65 even 20 years ago. So there is much more of a requirement, both legally and morally, I suppose, from a society perspective, to give more thought and consideration to retirement. So even though you may have 65 as the retirement age in your contract of employment, we can see that there's a lot of pressure on organisations now to at least consider extensions beyond that. And 29% of organisations in response to that are allowing employees to work beyond their retirement age. And 35% of organisations are allowing people to work beyond it, but only in certain circumstances. And I suppose the requirement on employers is twofold. One is to assess whether you have an objective justification for your retirement age in general, in a generic way in your organisation. Can you objectively justify it in your context? But then secondly, every time there is a particular individual who's maybe coming close to retirement, have you sat and done an objective justification on that particular individual, on that particular role, at that particular point in time, before you make a decision? Because it is much, much harder now to stand over and justify particularly a compulsory redundancy situation, compulsory retirement situation. And I suppose that's been reflected in the WRC figures, because we're seeing last year discrimination claims on the grounds of age increased by 176% compared to their figures in 2021. So very significant challenges around that space, and really a word of warning to employers if you are coming up to a point in time where you have a lot of employees facing retirement. We'll move on now to gender pay and performance management. And from a diversity and inclusion perspective, we see that 55% of organisations have a diversity and inclusion policy in place, which is obviously a very positive thing to start with that formal documentation of the intent of the organisation. We'll expect to see that increasing year on year and getting a little bit higher and a bit more normalised in our organisations. But again, good to get a measure of where we're currently sitting. And then 1 in 2 organisations, so 48% of our respondents have not delivered diversity and inclusion training in the last 12 months. And that's a decrease of 54% from 2022. And I suppose the reason that that's significant is because typically conducting awareness training or focus groups or that type of engagement with employees is usually the first step on an organization's journey to try and build more of a focus around diversity and inclusion. So kind of interesting to see that we're not quite there yet, roughly kind of 50% of the journey in terms of opening up that conversation in organizations. So hopefully we'll start to see a little bit more of that next year. So taking a lens focus then on gender pay gap particularly, and obviously this has been actually a really interesting space over the course of 2023. So we know that organizations with 250 or more employees were obligated to report their gender pay gap in December of last year. So it's really through this year we're starting to get a sense of the data and the norms around this. And we know that organizations with 150 or more employees will be obligated to report in 2024. And organizations with 50 or more employees will be obligated to report in 2025. So gradually we're going to get more and more information around this space. But equally, there are organizations that are not required to report their gender pay gap on a compulsory basis, but have chosen to do that on a voluntary basis. So we see 1 in 5 organizations are going down that route and reporting on a voluntary basis, which is a really positive thing, because there's an opportunity for you to get ahead of the curve in terms of, one, understanding the functional capability of actually recording those metrics, which can be difficult in itself and is a first hurdle. And then secondly, getting more of an opportunity to look at what the results tell you and consider what initiatives you might want to put in place and potentially implement those initiatives and try and get that gender pay gap percentage down a little bit further, possibly before you're obligated to report them publicly. So there's a window of opportunity for any of those organizations at the moment that are below 250 employees that may wish to go on that journey. But 39% of our respondents are recording their gender pay gap at the moment. So we're starting to get the data, as I said, and we see that the average gender pay gap from our survey participants is 7.3%. And when you compare that nationally, the CSO figures released in October reported at 9.6%, just October gone. So interesting to see, generally that's the kind of norms across the country that we're sitting at between 7.3 and 9.6%. And the reason that that's significant is because, as Sarah mentioned earlier on, we have the EU Transparency Directive coming into Ireland in the next 3 years, and that's going to bring in additional requirements on employers in this space. And one of the requirements is that where an organization has a gender pay gap of 5% or greater, they will be obligated to do a joint pay assessment in consultation with their employee representatives. And that's just going to bring a whole other layer of requirement on an organization and scrutiny on an organization to explore, understand the data, share the justification behind the data, and engage in consultation to try and improve those figures. And if they can't objectively justify those figures, or they can't rectify it within the 6-month period, that's when the joint pay assessment will kick in. and it's just much more onerous on employers. So if, I suppose the takeaway message is, if this isn't a space you've given a lot of focus to in 2023, it's definitely something that will need to be increased on the priority list for 2024, because it's just, aside from the fact of, you know, the expectation of the market in terms of employees and good employer branding, etc., there is going to be much more of a compliance requirement in the coming years to focus on that space. And then the next area we look at then is around what are the initiatives that people have introduced in the past 12 months. So it's always good opportunity for us through the Barometer survey to actually see what organizations are doing if they are driving a focus on this space. And 1 in 5 organizations have introduced new initiatives to address gender pay balance in the past 12 months. And that's in the Munster region, in comparison to 1 in 4 organisations that have introduced these initiatives in the rest of Ireland. So again, always interesting to see where you sit in terms of being ahead of the curve in introducing these concepts. And in terms of what those initiatives are, we see increased flexible workplace practices coming in highest at 52%, embedding diversity and inclusion into talent acquisition strategies. And that's been a really good opportunity. And we've got some really interesting examples over this year of 2023 of organizations that were facing some of those skills shortages and challenges, and really took a specific focus and effort on driving that D&I agenda and using it to increase the number of employees that might be attracted to work in their business. And then we also see campaigns to raise awareness on gender and diversity and inclusion coming in at 50%. And you can flick through there and see some of the other norms, but really good to see those sorts of initiatives coming into practice. And then finally, I just want to look at performance management. So always an interesting space to keep an eye on. And we see that 81% of organizations have a performance management process in place. And that's been an increase by 12% from 2022. And so that's really indicative of organizations realizing, I'd like to think, the importance and the significance that having a really clear performance management process can have, both in terms of driving performance of the organization, but also in terms of engaging with employees and making sure there's clarity and expectations. So in terms of how effective those performance processes are, 16% of respondents have told us that they believe that their performance management is either not very effective or completely ineffective. So obviously that's a figure you really don't want to be sitting within, because to have it in place in the first place is an effort in itself. But of course, what's really important is it working? Is it having an impact? And 38% of organizations believe their process is either very effective or effective. So there's definitely an opportunity for improvement there, and really an area that organizations should be focusing on, making sure that at the very least they're effective. But ideally, performance management processes should really be something that's valued by employees and the business alike, in terms of using it for the tool it's designed to be. So in the next slide, we see that 1 in 2 organizations have a plan in place to change their performance management process in the next 12 months. So that's a positive thing, and I'm hopeful that that is an indicator that they recognize that maybe the fact that they've started to create more and more performance management process is a first step, but in response to more of our agile ways of working, more of the autonomy that's given to employees, more of the kind of accountability that's required, and the clarity and expectations that perhaps, and as Amanda talked earlier on, culture and engagement and all those things, that maybe the next phase is really to try and enhance those practices and make sure that they are delivering their maximum value to the organizations. So in terms of what changes people are looking at, so we've asked what one thing, if implemented, would have or has had the biggest positive impact on the effectiveness of their process. And we see that 52% of respondents have said more regular reviews, 23% have said clearer links to bonus and salary, and 16% have said more input from colleagues and peers. So that's definitely a continuing trend in terms of the frequency of reviews, and it's all about having the conversations, not just once a year where people are, you know, frightened to go into a room, but feedback is much easier to receive and to give if it's given frequently. And of course, if it's given as close to the point in time that the incident happened, whether it was a positive event or maybe a more constructive learning opportunity, the more frequently they're happening, the easier that is for everyone, and the tension is kind of removed somewhat from those conversations. And there's an opportunity to be much more impactful. Also, with the requirement for more and more pay transparency, not just in response to the cost of living crisis, but also for people to be able to have a clear understanding of how their performance can positively impact their salary outcome or maybe a bonus, and that they feel a sense of pay transparency and equity and fairness in terms of how the organization is managing that. They're really, really important indicators. So good to see that kind of feedback coming back to us. And then also we see the trend in using technology more and more to try and remove the admin from the system and make that a much more effective process. So in terms of moving forward and the plan for next year and what changes people are looking to kind of go on into its next phase of development and make, we see a continuing focus on continuous feedback and dialogue, and that come out at 40%. So again, I suppose in line with what I've talked about, really, really critical part. And then focus on agile and collaborative goals coming in at 27%. And then ongoing progress reviews with accountability and incentives. And again, I think that's in response to the working practices and requirement for having a really clear sense of how am I getting on, maybe every month or maybe every quarter, that there's a really clear understanding of accountability and performance against that accountability on very frequent intervals throughout the year. And again, always a focus on more integrated learning and development, really key part of that conversation in terms of giving the feedback, but also having the support there and putting a plan in place for people to continue on that development journey, either to progress their own careers or to focus on maybe upskilling in a certain area as the business requires them to be more agile. And then finally, a focus on personal and work goals. So hopefully that's given you some pointers in the areas of performance management and some ideas of maybe what, if you think about where you sit in your organization compared to some of that data, and it might direct your focus a little bit for next year. So I'll hand you back to Sarah now, who will take you through some of the working practices data.
Thank you, Michelle and Amanda, for the insights and the trends that we're expecting for the next year. One of the key areas of the since we started the HR Barometer, and in particular because of the pandemic, are working practices. A lot of organizations will say, "Oh, we have our policies and procedures in place," and that essentially we are able to monitor its effectiveness year on year in relation to how is best working. What we've looked at is the changes in the shifts to fully remote, hybrid working, and fully on site. We see that in September of this year, 13% of organizations were working fully remote. In comparison to 2022, there was a slight uplift of 1%. From a hybrid working perspective, that has increased significantly in most regions, where in October 2022 is coming in at 46%. And for hybrid working in 2020.
Sarah, sorry to interrupt there. Apologies. Just your line isn't great. I don't know if there's something you can alter there. Just maybe turn it on and
apologies,
off again,
everyone.
Perhaps. Oh, that's clearer there. Maybe it was just your distance from the mic. Sorry, Sarah. Go ahead there again.
Apologies, everyone. Hopefully you're okay now.
Go ahead there, Sarah. We'll just.
Okay. You might just let me know if that arises again. So what I was just discussing was the significant increase in hybrid working in October 2022 from 46% up to 68% in September 2023, and a decrease of fully on-site work from 42% in October 2022 to fully on-site 19% in 2023. And a lot of this could be reminiscent of what's happening within the market, and essentially that the responses to value proposition, to the requirements to attract key talent into your organization was impacting on how flexible you were working within your organization. And that will be set to continue over the next 12 months, where there is a current skill shortage, and that it will continue into the next 12 months and 2024 and beyond. But also in terms of code of practice on the right to request for remote working, we do anticipate a number of challenges arising in that specific area, notwithstanding that organizations do actually have the policies and procedures in place. It will cause some flux in terms of individual applications once the code of practice is published. So the time is now in terms of organizations considering what they can do in that respect, and how they're dealing or managing with any requests that will arise in the future. Just on to the next slide now, we're looking at the basis of employees and their requirement to be present.
Sorry, Sarah, there's a couple of comments coming in. It's actually dropping in and out. Do you want to try turn off your video? Just the volume, the sound might be a bit better. We'll just try that. Thanks so much. Let's see if that's a little bit better.
Hopefully you can hear me okay. And once again, apologies for the technology.
Yeah,
is that okay, Annie?
Before. Yeah, I think that's clearer, Sarah. We'll just try that if that's all right. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So effectively, we looked at the definition of being required to be in the workplace, and 90% of organizations defined how the organization would deal with and manage working practices, whereas only 5% was defined by the employee. And the descriptor of how hybrid working was working within organizations in the Munster region really set out whether it was defined by number of days, defined by operational requirements, or defined by departmental or team requirements. So you can see on the slide in front of you, essentially 74% of organizations are defining hybrid working by the number of days in the workplace, whereas only 10% are defining it by operational requirements and 16% defining it by departmental or team requirements. Now, this is significant because obviously it's representative of how businesses within the Cork and Munster region are attracting and retaining key talent in relation to the working practices they have. We've seen a lot of businesses that are flirting between 2 and 3 days over the course of the last 12 months in terms of the hybrid working arrangements that are in place. But for us, it's really important to ascertain what the average number of days is within businesses, in particular in the Munster region. You can understand then what's happening across sectors and in light of your competition, and how you can, maybe emphasize your own value proposition when it comes to working practices. So on the next slide, we've detailed the average number of days, and you can see that essentially for hybrid working, it has come in as 2.8 days, which is a very slight increase from 2.7 across the rest of Ireland when we asked organisations throughout Ireland what the average number of days was. And it's really good insight to be able to bring back to your business about what is happening across the Munster region in terms of the average number of days, because there could be shifts in that in the coming year, in particular as we wait, as I mentioned, to the publication of the Code of Practice. Will that impact on how you manage your hybrid working practices? Potentially, yes. Does it mean that you have to amend your policies now? No, it doesn't. But it's all about best preparing for the eventual individual applications and how that could impact as well on attracting and key talent into your organizations. In particular, as we've seen when my colleague Amanda discussed the increase of headcount that's anticipated over the next 12 months. So ensuring that you're consistently monitoring what's happening in the market is extremely important in terms of that value proposition, and ensuring that you are attracting and retaining the talent that you have within your business, and the flexibility that is afforded to employees across your organization is obviously a key priority for employees still. The other areas that we looked at when it came to working practices was really about understanding the benefits in terms of productivity. Now, I think since the pandemic, there's always been a high degree of productivity or acknowledgement of productivity in relation to the working practices. And that hasn't changed much, with 62%, so 6 out of 10 organizations citing that their hybrid working has benefited them in terms of productivity. And certainly we can all understand, you know, the basis of that. There's potentially less meetings in some organizations, there's greater focus time, more balance achieved in terms of the flexibility that's afforded through hybrid working practices. But this is a key measurement to ensure that you are still making strides in relation to your strategic objectives. When productivity starts to go down, that's when you might have to reevaluate how the flexibility or hybrid working is benefiting your organization. So it's really important, like Amanda discussed, that we're measuring certain returns of investment in relation to these strategic initiatives. Another area is always looking at the impact on performance. And a lot of organizations have consistently said, we'll just go back to the previous slide, that essentially they will look at performance and its impact in terms of hybrid working practices. And 29%, so almost 3 out of 10 organizations are saying that those impacts are positive, whereas there's almost 1 in 10, 13%, who are saying that performance is negatively impacted, and 45%, so 4 out of 10 organizations saying that it remains unchanged. This is, again, an important indicator in relation to the impact of hybrid working, and it's something that should be continuously monitored and managed, just to ensure that, you know, the ways of working within your organizations are working both to the benefit of the employee but to the organization as well, and that we are in totality making progress, as I mentioned, in terms of our own individual, team and company objectives to ensure that strides are made in your overall arching goals. Now, the next thing that we'll look at, and an area that's always of importance, are the biggest challenges relating to your current working model. And, you know, this has changed over the course of the last 2 years. We obviously roll out the HR Barometer twice in a year, every year. And it's because those shifts within the market and the trends and insights that emerge from it. And, you know, in comparison to the last couple of years, we've seen engagement, team connection, culture, collaborative practices move throughout the scale of, you know, it being a primary challenge for businesses or less important, depending on what's happening, you know, across the market and across your organization. For this year in the Munster region, engagement levels is one of the biggest challenges relating to the current working model that's in place within organisations in the Cork region. And that's coming in at 48%, which is slightly higher than the rest of Ireland, which is at 46%. And we've seen a lot of investment in strategic HR and ensuring that we're consistently taking the pulse of our workforce and ensuring that, you know, communication pathways are being strengthened consistently. And, you know, to a degree of what has happened over the last 12 months, there's been ebbs and flows in relation to that type of investment. So certainly it's important that we continue to monitor engagement levels for a variety of reasons in terms of the financial and non-financial benefits that can be aligned to engagement levels of employees, but also the discretionary efforts that are applied in terms of an engaged workforce. And statistically, we know that those who are more engaged are more aligned to the company value and culture. And that is something, again, that's coming out as a key challenge. You can see that 32% of organizations, so 1 in 3 organizations in the Munster region, are saying that culture is one of the biggest challenges on the current working model. Now, that's significantly lower than the rest of Ireland, where 45% are saying that culture is one of the key challenges. But ultimately, it's a very significant challenge, you know, for the Munster region in terms of culture, that alignment to your goals. And we're seeing a lot of businesses that are actually reevaluating their culture and trying to engage employees in its construct or in its revision to ensure that there's greater buy-in, greater alignment, and ensuring that it is, even more embedded in terms of the blended and flexible working practices that are in place. Because obviously, as you know, now we have employees who are both working from home and then working from your office or location. So it's really important that, you know, new starts are also aligning to what that sense of culture is within your organization. And there's times from a strategic perspective that would add great value in identifying how you can tackle those challenges, what initiatives you need to roll out. Is it a revision, or is it just a further embedding and enhancing? And who are the key owners? You know, that it doesn't come just from the top down in terms of leadership and your HR directors and so forth, but that it's owned and everyone within the business has an accountability in relation to enhancing your culture within your organization, which will lead to greater team connection, lead to greater engagement levels of employees, and essentially assist you in making strides within your HR people agenda, as well as your overarching strategy and goals. So that information is obviously prevalent to a lot of organizations in the Munster region, and it will hopefully allow you to bring back you know, some key actions that you will move forward with into 2024 and beyond, to ensure that there's a constant moving of the dial as it comes to engagement culture, team connection, and collaborative practices. The final section that we're going to look at is pay and benefits. And obviously this is an important time of year and very timely in terms of what's happening, you know, within your own business, with your competitors and so forth. The first thing is that we always look to understand at this time of year what organizations are doing in terms of increasing salaries for the upcoming year. 7 out of 10 organizations have indicated that they will be planning to increase salaries in 2024. You can also see the graph that's applicable to the rest of Ireland, and where, since we've been monitoring what the key data metrics are and insights in relation to all aspects of strategic HR, looking at salary increases, we've seen since 2017 up until this point that it's always moved between 3 and 4%. And that's something that's common across the country in relation to those salary increases. However, when we asked in our 7.1 HR Barometer earlier this year what the anticipated salary increase would be for next year, essentially 4.67% was the average expected salary increase in 2023. Now, the actual salary increase from our latest data indicates within the Munster region, the actual salary increase for 2023 is 4.8%, and that's higher than the rest of Ireland, which was coming in at 4.2%. Now, again, this could be indicative of what's happening from a skills perspective, and the competition within, in particular in the Cork region, there's so many fantastic businesses. How are you attracting key talent, and what are you doing from your remuneration framework perspective? In particular, we've seen that increase over the last, I'd say probably 3 or 4 surveys from the rest of Ireland in comparison to the Munster region, where salary increases seem to be just that little bit higher. And it's good to understand this information, in particular as there will be increases to headcount planted for the upcoming year, that it's really essential you are standing out from your competitors in relation to anything from a value proposition or total reward perspective. We also, of course, look to see what's happening in the upcoming year, and the anticipated salary increase for 2024 is slightly lower at 3.7%. Now, again, this could be an impact on, you know, the economist's view that there'll be a slowdown in growth in 2024, inflation will be decreasing, interest rates will be decreasing. So the anticipated salary increase is proportionate to that. That is slightly lower, interestingly enough, to the rest of Ireland, where the anticipated salary increase for 2024 is actually coming in at 3.8% on average. So very interesting there, just in terms of what to expect for the upcoming year. But it's really important that to understand why salary increases are or how they're being applied. And every year we ask this question just to really understand what's happening in the market. Are we continuing to be responsive because of the movement of employees and resources from business to business? Or is it something that as an organization, we're seeking to build in that business resilience that I discussed at the beginning? So what we've seen this year is that 27% are applying salary increases unilaterally across an organization, whereas 18% are going to be performance-based and 55%, so quite a significant figure, is actually a mix of both. And again, this is something that you could say is both proactive and reactive in relation to what is happening in the market, but nonetheless, hopefully useful information to bring back to your business. Now, the contingencies of salary increases are also a key area of focus in terms of what's happening in 2023 in the market. And, as we moved through the pandemic, there was some concern relating to unconditional increases, which were, obviously responding to what was happening in the market and had been quite high. And that has actually decreased now to 9%, which is great to see. And there's a greater emphasis once more on company affordability and company profitability being the primary causes for salary increases being applied in 2023. In fact, company profitability has actually increased from 12 months ago, where it was coming in at 42% as a contingency of the application of salary increases, and that's now increased to 45%. So a marginal increase, but still significant in terms of what businesses are doing and the contingencies of salary increases. The main thing is, and the main message is, that we need to ensure that whatever is applied from a salary increase perspective is sustainable to businesses, and that you're able to maintain that business resilience as you go into 2024. We always say don't chase inflation. Ultimately, there's ebbs and flows in that, and that's really been a challenge to businesses over the course of the last 12 months because of rising inflation. But ensuring that your remuneration model and your framework in terms of salary increases is sustainable is a primary objective for businesses. So that alignment to company affordability and profitability will likely continue to increase over the coming years. Now, one of the key areas, and Michelle touched on it earlier as well, it relates to the EU directive on pay transparency. And essentially, whilst, yes, Ireland has just less than 3 years to transpose the directive into national legislation, we are very aware that there are 2 private member bills that currently are moving through committee stages, albeit are at the earlier stages, so the second stage for both of the private member bills in relation to applications of the EU Transparency Directive. That to me signals that the government are, taking it as a priority area, the fact that the private member bills are still moving, albeit slowly, through Dáil Éireann and the legislative process. But it could indicate that that legislation will be transposed earlier than the 3 years. The reason I'm mentioning this is that it's a real opportunity for organizations to start planning and preparing what they're doing with their pay transparency, their remuneration models and frameworks, because these kinds of initiatives can take, a number of months to develop, to roll out, to test, to ensure that you're both meeting the compliance requirements of the, anticipated legislation, but also, what works from a sustainability and resilience perspective for your own business. So we're really curious to understand what organizations are doing, or if there are even any considerations in relation to changes to pay models. And what we've seen is that 1 in 5 organizations are intending to change their pay model in the next 12 months. So that's 20% of organizations who are looking at and developing their own pay models. And in particular, as we consider the Munster region and the increases to headcount in the upcoming year, it's important that you are ahead of the curve when it comes to this. If your remuneration framework is not working for your business, if it's not sustainable, if it's not attracting the right talent or retaining the key talent that you have for your business, now is the opportunity to start looking at the associated costs, what will work for your business. Because there is a lot of competition because of the labor shortages, so getting ahead of the curve is really important. In particular, as you compare that to the rest of Ireland, where only 1 in 10 organizations are seeking to or intending to change their pay model in the next 12 months, it's significantly higher in the Munster region. And with salary increases being that little bit higher than Ireland, and competition being tough in relation to labour and resources, it's really important that you're taking some of this information back to your business to understand, is the time now for your business to start reviewing how your remuneration models work, or what would be the key reason for making any changes. We also sought to understand that from the 1 in 5 who are intending to change their pay model. What is the purpose of it? So the main and primary reason for organizations planning to change their pay model relates to retention of employees. 1 in 2 organizations are planning to do it because primarily of retention, whereas a lower number in terms of the pay model not being sustainable, so 17%, employee expectations is 17%, which again you could say is about retention or even attraction of key talent, or to achieve pay parity, 16%. So the primary purpose of the EU Pay Transparency Directive is about that pay parity and the equality, across genders, and that is a lower percentage here, but still nonetheless a strategic goal of organizations to ensure that their value proposition is front and center to outpace your competitors and attract that key talent. It could be an opportunity to start, if not in the next 6 months, maybe closer to 2025, to understand what will happen in that regard. Just moving on to the next section, then we look at bonus payments. And, interestingly enough, there's again been a shift in comparison to 2022's figures, where 55% of organizations are paying or intending to pay bonuses in 2023. Almost 1 in 5 are saying that they're not paying bonuses in 2023. Again, this could be related to business resilience and sustainability, but both of these figures are in stark contrast to what was happening in the Munster region last year, where 44% of organizations intended to pay bonuses in 2022 and 42% didn't intend to pay bonuses. When we compare that to the rest of Ireland for 2023, the 55% is significantly higher than 44% across the rest of Ireland who are intending to pay bonuses, and 4 out of 10 or 2 out of 5 who are not intending to pay bonuses in 2023. Again, there's lots of rationale for this, and sometimes because of the course of the last 24 months, where a lot of businesses were struggling from a financial perspective, there could be a greater emphasis on bonus payments and the total reward concepts and mechanics within your business to ensure that you are retaining and rewarding your staff for the work done in the past year and for the strides made in strategic objectives being achieved and progress against your overall strategy. So again, great data to bring back to businesses in relation to what's happening in the next year, or at least this side of the year as well. The final area that we will just pay a couple of minutes to is in relation to the basis for paying bonuses. So effectively, we've seen shifts in this information if we compare it to previous years, in particular around the pandemic and what happened in the 18 months following that. There was great emphasis in terms of sustainability, then shifting to being responding to people remaining in your business, and that retention was a key area. And that now has changed again this year, where bonuses are being paid on individual employees' performance throughout the year by 53% of organizations, so 1 in 2. And the organization is performing well in 2023, achieving targets by 47%, so almost 1 in 2 again. Whereas, the intention to reward employees for their loyalty and staying with the business in 2023 is significantly lower this time round in comparison to previous HR Barometer results, with only 6% paying bonuses for that particular reason. And the same in relation to rising inflation. Again, a lower figure being provided from the data in the Munster region at only 6% paying bonuses for this very reason, or in response to the skills shortage. And when we consider, the business resilience and the sustainability requirements in terms of the economy within Ireland and what's expected in the next year, it's actually important that we're seeing a reversal in relation to bonus payments, total reward, being based on that company and then filtering down to individual performance, because it's all about maintaining that resilience in the upcoming year and ensuring that your employees are rewarded for the right reasons. Obviously, there are times where as leaders we have to respond to what's happening in the market, but essentially it's really important that as we continue to operate with a potentially lower growth in next year, that business resilience is maintained. I discussed at the very beginning in relation to the known and unknown disruptors, and certainly, there's a lot that we can contingency plan for now and we can budget for now, but there's still a lot that is unknown, and what is going to happen in the next 12 to 18 months. We need to be prepared for those unknown disruptors. So effectively, it's really about ensuring that as leaders, as HR practitioners, we're leading out on the preparation, the planning that will be required to address the known and unknown disruptors in order to maintain that business resilience. There's so much opportunity within the market, and the economy has proven that it's quite strong the past year, and we don't want that to be circumvented by not using the opportunity now to contingency plan and using our people agendas in the right way to create the value proposition that will benefit to our organizations and to our people. So I just want to thank you all for your attention. I do apologize for the glitch in my sound. We should be well used to the technology disruptors that are happened. I should take my own advice and contingency plan for that in future. But I hope that you still were able to take away some of the key data that was provided at this session. We only have 2 minutes remaining, so I'm just going to try to very briefly go through some of the questions that are highlighted here. And let me just see. So one of the comments from one of our attendees relates to the tools which many companies were using over the last 1 to 2 years in order to address the cost of living challenges for employees, were tax-free vouchers under small benefit exemption scheme. Are our clients planning to dial back on using this lever in 2024, or is it becoming a more permanent feature of companies' pay model? Certainly from our own experience in terms of some of our clients and what they're doing, there is actually a dial back in that. And I think what a lot of the data is showing is that conservatism of fiscal spending that I discussed at the beginning. There's so much opportunity for growth in Ireland, but unfortunately, there's a lot of challenges coming our way in terms of the slowdown in growth from an economic perspective. And that business sustainability and resilience that I keep discussing and raising is being demonstrated through a lot of our clients, where they're really trying to ensure that business resilience is maintained. And whilst they had to be reactive to the market and the application of some benefits in terms of responding to inflation, it's less and less organizations that are actually planning to continue with that in the coming year. And that, of course, that is just from our own clients' perspective, which might be different for some of the people that we don't work with yet. So listen, I think we're at the very end, Annie. I don't know if there's still at the moment. I want to thank everyone in Court Chamber for allowing us to provide this these insights and this information to the Court Chamber members. We hope to see you over the course of the next 12 months and hopefully hear of some of the great opportunities that you've been availing of in terms of the strategic initiatives and so forth. So thank you everyone for joining us and for your patience when it came to my sound, and we hope to speak to you all soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks all for joining. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.